It was nearly midnight when Daniel stumbled onto the deserted train platform. The city had already gone quiet, the streets above dark and empty. The only sound was the faint hum of electricity buzzing through the overhead wires. He was late. Too late. The last train of the night should have already left. Yet as he made his way down the platform, he froze. A train stood waiting. It didn't look like any train he had ever seen before. The cars were old, their metal sides tarnished and streaked with rust. Faded numbers were barely visible beneath the grime, and the windows were so dark they looked painted black. A dim lantern flickered at the front of the engine, casting just enough light to reveal the letters stenciled on the side. Midnight Line. Daniel frowned. He rode this route every week, and there was no such line on the schedule. Still, the doors were open. A cold breeze blew down the platform, carrying the faint smell of smoke and iron. Daniel hesitated, checking the clock above the ticket booth. 11:59. If he missed this, he'd be stranded. He peered and sighed. The carriage beyond was empty, silent, lit by a single swaying bulb that buzzed faintly in the stale air. Something about it felt wrong. The shadows stretched too far. The air was too still. But the thought of walking home alone through miles of dark streets felt worse. With a deep breath, Daniel stepped inside. The doors hissed shut behind him, and the midnight train welcomed its newest passenger. The moment the doors sealed behind Daniel, a chill crawled up his spine. The air inside the carriage was stale, thick with the smell of dust and something metallic, like rust or blood. He walked slowly down the aisle, his footsteps echoing far too loudly against the cracked linoleum floor. The seats were old, upholstered in faded red fabric that had long since begun to rot and peel. Dust clung to every surface, rising in small clouds each time he brushed past. It felt as though no one had sat here for decades. Yet there were signs of life. Strange markings had been carved into the wooden panels near the windows, jagged, uneven lines that at first looked like graffiti, but when Daniel leaned closer, his stomach tightened. They weren't words, they were symbols. Circles intersecting with crooked lines, shapes that twisted into one another like a puzzle designed to drive someone mad. The swaying bulb above flickered once, and in that moment of half-darkness, Daniel thought he saw movement in the reflection of the glass, like someone sitting across from him. But when the light steadied again, the seat was empty. He tried the door to the next carriage, expecting it to be locked. It wasn't. With a reluctant push, it creaked open, revealing another carriage beyond. This one was darker, the light above broken, leaving only the glow of the passing tunnel outside. The seats here were cleaner, but arranged strangely, as if they had been moved around by unseen hands. Daniel's throat went dry. He told himself it was just an old train, some forgotten line that still made its rounds. But deep down, he knew something wasn't right. Then, from somewhere deeper in the train, he heard it. The faint scrape of footsteps. He wasn't alone. Daniel moved carefully down the narrow aisle, his ears straining for the sound he thought he'd heard. The train swayed gently as it rattled through the dark tunnel, though he couldn't recall ever feeling it start. He slid open the door to the next carriage,
and froze. There were people here. At least they looked like people. Rows of passengers sat in silence, their bodies stiff, their heads slightly tilted downward as though they were sleeping. Not one of them moved when Daniel entered. Their clothes were strange, outdated, like fashions from different decades stitched together in a patchwork of history. A man in a suit from the 1950s sat beside a woman in a tattered floral dress that looked a century older. Daniel let out a shaky laugh of relief. Finally, other passengers! But as he stepped closer, his relief turned to dread. None of them were breathing. Their chests did not rise or fall. Their skin was pale, waxy, stretched too tight across their faces. He leaned toward a young man seated near the aisle. "Hey, excuse me," Daniel whispered, reaching out. The man's head snapped toward him with unnatural speed. Daniel stumbled back, his heart leaping into his throat. The passenger's eyes were wide, empty, pits of solid black. His mouth opened slowly, far wider than it should have, but no sound came out, only the faint hiss of air, like a broken radio. One by one, the others began to stir. Heads turned, mouths stretched. Dozens of lifeless, black-eyed faces now stared at him in unison. The door behind Daniel slammed shut with a metallic clang. He was trapped, and the other passengers were no longer still.
The train lurched forward with sudden force, nearly knocking Daniel off his feet. The floor vibrated beneath him, the rattling of wheels on the tracks growing louder, faster, until it felt like the whole carriage was alive and hungry. The passengers didn't move from their seats, but their black eyes followed him wherever he went. Their mouths twitched as if whispering silent words too faint for him to hear. Then, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed from the far end of the carriage. Slow, deliberate, each step ringing out like the strike of a bell. The passengers all turned their heads at once toward the sound, and Daniel's stomach twisted with dread. From the shadows emerged the conductor. He was impossibly tall, his frame draped in a faded uniform that looked as ancient as the train itself. A cap sat low over his head, but it couldn't hide the face beneath. Skin stretched thin across sharp bones, hollow sockets glowing faintly as though embers burned inside. In his gloved hand, he carried a rusted puncher. "Tickets, please," the conductor said. His voice was low, gravelly, like iron grinding against stone. Daniel's hands shook. I don't have a ticket. I just got on. I didn't know." The conductor tilted his head slowly, studying him with those burning, hollow eyes. "Everyone has a ticket," he whispered. "Some are just written on the soul." He leaned closer, and Daniel caught the stench of decay rolling off him. The puncher clicked open and shut, echoing like a gun cocking in the silence. "No one leaves the midnight train, not until the last stop." The passengers began to move then, their mouths opening wide, their whispers growing louder, a chorus of voices chanting words Daniel couldn't understand. The train hurtled faster into the blackness, and Daniel realized with a cold, sinking dread, this ride was only beginning.
The train thundered through the dark, the carriages rattling like bones in a coffin. Daniel gripped the edge of a seat as the world outside the windows began to change. At first, it was only shadows, shapes sliding past in the blackness. But then the tunnel widened, and he saw landscapes rushing by, places that couldn't exist. On one side, endless mountains of bone stretched into the horizon, skulls and spines piled high like snowdrifts. On the other, a burning city crumbled in silence, flames swallowing buildings that had no people left inside. Beyond that, a desert of ash, where pale figures crawled across the dunes, reaching toward the train with skeletal hands. Daniel's breath came in short, ragged gasps. This isn't real," he whispered. "This can't be real." But the passengers around him began to stir. Their heads tilted in unison, their black eyes turning toward him. For the first time, they moved together, slowly raising their arms, pointing their trembling fingers. And then he heard it. A whisper. Not from the passengers this time, from the train itself. "Daniel!" His blood froze. The voice was inside his head, curling around his thoughts, calling him closer. He stumbled backward, clutching his ears, but the voice only grew louder. The passengers began to chant his name now, over and over, a dozen, then dozens of voices blending into one suffocating echo. "Daniel, Daniel, Daniel." His chest tightened as panic clawed through him. This wasn't just a train, it was a vessel, a carriage not for the living, but for souls that had nowhere else to go. The midnight train wasn't taking him home. It was taking him where he was never meant to return. The chanting grew louder, shaking the walls of the carriage. Daniel pressed himself against the door, fumbling desperately with the handle, but it wouldn't budge. His palms were slick with sweat, his breath ragged. "Let me out!" he shouted, slamming his fists against the metal. "I don't belong here!" The conductor appeared again, his long frame filling the aisle. The glow in his hollow sockets burned brighter, casting shadows across the passengers' lifeless faces. He lifted the rusted puncher and clicked it once, the sound sharp and final. "Every passenger belongs here," he said. "Every soul finds its stop." Daniel shook his head violently. "No, no, I'm not dead, I'm not!" The conductor leaned closer, his skeletal face inches away, and whispered, "Aren't you?" The train screeched as it slowed, the world outside shifting once more. Through the window, Daniel saw a platform appear out of the void. It was crumbling, cloaked in shadows, lit by a single flickering lantern. Above it hung a rusted sign. His name was carved into it. Daniel. His knees buckled. "No, no, this isn't real!" The doors hissed open, releasing a gust of freezing air that smelled of ash and earth. The passengers rose from their seats at last, moving stiffly, their black eyes fixed on him. The conductor pointed toward the platform. "End of the line." Daniel clawed at the seats, at the walls, desperate for something to hold on to, but unseen hands dragged at him, pulling him forward toward the waiting dark. His scream echoed through the carriage as the doors closed behind him. The train shuddered, then pulled away, vanishing once more into the endless black. and Daniel was gone. The midnight train continued on, waiting for its next passenger.